And coming up next at middleweight, we have Cody Brundage taking on Zach Reese. And Rick, I feel like Cody Brundage is someone that we have mentioned a lot recently in our fight previews and our recent videos. And it's because we have. Brundage lost to Rodolfo Vieira, who pulled out as we were recording our UFC Sao Paulo card. So the video went out, but ultimately we never got to see Vieira fight. And then Brundage lost to Cedricus Dumas, who we previewed on the UFC 294 card in October. Yeah, our guy, Cedricus Dumas. He also has fights against William Knight in the Contender Series, Nick Maximov, the notorious Nate Diaz boy, and then Tresean Gore, not our guy, but a Ultimate Fighter alum with the Vulcan T-City season. So a lot of those were losses besides the Tresean Gore fight. And then the recent win for him, or should I say win, because it was an illegal elbow to the back of the head to Jacob Malkoun, who is a shared opponent of them both. So Brundage has a long resume since joining the UFC in 2021, which, I mean, good for him. 7 fights since joining in 2021. But when your 7 fights are 3-4, or what should be 2-5, and you're going up against somebody in Zach Reese, who comes off, sorry, they don't have a shared opponent with Jacob Malkoun. I stepped out of line there, but it comes off the Contender Series in August and is getting this turnaround here in November. I just kind of feel like they're feeding Brundage to the wolves here after what should not have been a win for him, his last fight out. And this is an interesting spot for Reese, who's favored at -260, but I don't necessarily know if his resume or the fight tape warrants those odds. What do you think?
So there's not much tape out there. And there's not much tape out there, not because it doesn't exist, but because his fights don't last long. And he's 29 years old now. 11 years ago, his amateur debut was against none other than Kevin Holland back in Cowboys Extreme Cage Fighting. He lost by decision in that fight, and obviously he was 18 years old. Kevin Holland at the time was 1-0 professionally, so it's not like that you can take really much from that fight. But then he took 5 years off, had a couple more amateur fights, and then every single one of his professional fights, he's finished in the first round, and 5 of those have come really within a minute. One was just after a minute, but for the sake of the point, basically just a minute in. And in watching each of those fights, 0 of his opponents gave him any sort of, like, I could have probably done about equal to what his opponents did. There was no damage back his way. I don't think anyone landed a strike against him. No one has tested him. No one's given any sort of, like, when they're on the ground, he immediately just progresses to mount, is either able to finish via submission or just ground and pound his way to victory. Against Malik Jamaze back in 2021. He tried a Kimura, failed, but then he just got a body lock, took him down, flattened him out, and submitted him, all within a minute. And same goes against Fred Zamora in his professional debut, where he took him down, squared him up, and then landed 3 nasty elbows that just knocked him out cold. So there's not much, but what we've seen from him is that he has got every tool available. He can kick to all levels. He's got powerful punching. His wrestling is dominant, and his grappling and his ground and pound are deadly. Now, this is such a gigantic step up in competition. Even though Cody Brundage should be 0-4 in his last 4 fights and be 2-5 in the UFC, this is still a huge step up in competition for Zach Reese. And so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to pass that test. But Brundage, for everything that I like about Brundage, it is very much a tale of when he quits or when he finds that he's going to lose the fight. Because he looks great until it looks horrible. And when it looks horrible, he pretty much just submits and says, I'm done. I'm out of here. Like, where you finish me real quick, ref, step in. Without actually calling for the ref, he might as well be calling for the ref. Because as soon as that gas tank goes, he's done. As soon as he gets damaged, he's out. And so I can see that being the case with Reese here, where you have a reputable name. You've got a guy who could test you in certain areas potentially. But more than likely, I see Reese finishing him. And so that's where I've got this fight going. I've got Reese winning the fight. The odds are way too thick for my liking, and I think that's why they've come down over the past 5 days. He opened around -300. It was about -275 last week. Now he's down to -220. And so I think that's a much more reasonable parlay piece. And so I'm going to do him with Costa. That's my parlay from +104. I've got a full unit on that. Melky Costa, we talked about it before. I expect him to win. I expect Reese to do the same, but there could definitely, I mean, an upset by Brundage would not shock me. If Reese got exposed here, it wouldn't surprise me. He's a UFC fighter, but Brundage is respectable.
Yeah, you are braver than I am. I can't put my hard-earned money on this fight. To your point, for every good thing I can say about Brundage, there's probably a bad thing or two I could say about him. But for Zach Reese, there's so many unknowns that I can't justify the minus 260 odds. And there's enough good things to say about Brundage and in the way that he fights and the fact that he's been through so many UFC fights and the experience versus Zach Reese, who has little to no experience in the sense of octagon time, in the sense of time actually spent in professional fights, because the guys that he has fought are all chumps. They are nobodies besides my boy Kevin Holland, an amateur. But like there's just so many unknowns about the fight where I'm really going to sit back and take some notes when I watch this one, because I'm interested to see, like, is Zach Reese worth a damn? That's the question I'm going to be looking for in this fight. And the minus 260 odds say yes, but my wallet says no. I'm not going to take anything on it. But from a pick standpoint, I am going to go with the experience. I'm going to go with the dog here. I'm going to take Brundage just based on that he's going up against somebody who lacks that type of time in the octagon in Zach Reese. So Rick is going with Zach Reese here. He's parlaying it with our guy, Mr. Melky Costa himself. I'm going with Brundage as the pick, but no bet on my side. So stay tuned with us as we take on another great women's bantamweight bout here in Miesha Tate taking on Julia Avila. Stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Pilsners and Prelims, a UFC betting podcast by Happy Hour Sports. Just want to ask if you could like and subscribe to the video if you like the content that we're putting out, and be sure to stay tuned to what we have coming up in the future. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the other side.